Welcome. My name is Gary Wilder. I'm the director of the Committee on Globalization and Social Change here at CUNY. And tonight's event is called Imagine Real Democracy. And it is going to be a dialogue among social movement actors from New York, Spain, Greece, and I'm sure other parts of the world and other experiences will come up in the dialogue and in the discussion. It seems to us in the Committee on Globalization that one of the things we can do during this really exciting moment in New York and in the world is to step back a little bit, reflect, try to make and draw some connections. The organizer and the moderator for tonight's event is Marina Citrin, and this also gives me a really nice opportunity to say how lucky we are in the Committee on Globalization and Social Change and how excited we are to have Marina Citrin as the postdoctoral fellow this year in the committee. She has a PhD in global sociology. She also has a JD in international human rights from CUNY Law School. And she's the author of Horizontalism, Voices of Popular Power in Argentina, and is just now completing another related book called Everyday Revolutions, Horizontalism and Autonomy in Argentina. So clearly Marina is just an ideal person to moderate this kind of events that looks at connections, this kind of event that looks at connections between these global movements, but also gives us some perspective, depth, historical precedent for some of what is happening today. So I'm very pleased to open this up and to introduce you to Marina.
I'm actually just facilitating the conversation, and I'm thrilled and proud to be facilitating. So what Gary said about me is probably most you're going to hear about me this evening. But who we have here tonight is someone from New York, which is Amin Hussein, who's been active in the Occupy Wall Street movement and even before in the kind of pre-planning to organize Occupy Wall Street. And then Mohammed Ezeldin from Egypt, who's here with us at CUNY, who's also part of organizing and being in the plaza, in the square in Egypt. And then we have Carissa Belis and Vicente Rubio, both from Spain, who are from Spain but are also here and are both going to be talking about the organizing in Spain and doing support and solidarity work from the U.S. with movements in Spain. The one thing I am going to say before we start, well, I'll say two things. One, we're videoing. Is everyone okay? Just so that you know that we're videotaping. So when we have the discussion, if you would speak really loud, because I think that mic's not working. And then a lot of my experience, kind of political experience, there's a lot of different experiences, but I spent a lot of time in Argentina after the economic crisis, and I've been participating in the Occupy Wall Street movement from even before also we took over the plaza, and every day it reminds me in different ways of the horizontal movements in Argentina. So there's this connection that as much as we're talking about these movements, the movements being new in New York, and well, wait a minute, are they new in New York? Because, well, what about Spain? And, well, then there's Egypt, and there's Greece, and there's Argentina, and there's Chiapas, and there's all of these kind of historical contexts that I think are really important to talk about. But this evening, what we're going to do is start what we hope to be one part of a series of dialogues with people who are participants in those movements. And just to start out with a brief, each person is going to briefly talk about kind of the crisis, why people came out in the street at all, and then the forms of organization that they're all using in space, public space. And then each person has been thinking about a question to ask the other. So then after each person speaks for 10 minutes, each person from each movement is going to ask a question of others in the movement, so we have a real kind of dialogue amongst people in the movements, learning from each other and sharing. And then we'll open it up for a discussion and questions. So we're going to start in the present and move into just a shorter immediate past. So we're going to start in New York with Amin.
So my name's Amin, and I guess in the spirit of horizontalism, obviously I'm just an organizer, and I'm speaking just my thoughts from my experience about what's going on. But, organizing for Occupy Wall Street began with a call from Adbusters that got put out there. And I think it's an experience that was learned from the Egyptians, where they set a date and then mobilized towards that date. They had no intention of organizing, and they indicated that to everyone. but it did really get people thinking about what to do. And people were meeting up, and there was a meeting at the end of July at 16 Beaver, and there were meetings before about what was happening in Tunisia and the austerity measures in Greece. And so there was a continuous dialogue that's interdisciplinary. And activists from the community were also involved, particularly from Bloombergville. So there were people that had already kind of entertained the idea of encampments on the sidewalks and so forth. And they had used the General Assembly then, at least once in the, I think twice a day. But it was nothing at the level that people are experiencing now. But this group of disparate people got together, and then they said, let's have a General Assembly, August 2nd. And it started from there. Every day we met, once a week we met. And people really didn't know each other. And there was discussions that were like, why are we doing this? And I think those weren't in-depth discussions. What people kind of recognized is that there was a moment in history and that it was right, and people were really angry. And the people in Tunisia and Egypt really inspired the ability for people power to take matters into their own hands. And there was, and I use this term loosely, a consensus that the government isn't responsive to the will of the people, even though it's democratic. And then the question is what to do about it. And the idea of a General Assembly seemed formed to address substance. And it's not only a way to organize, but it's a way to a way to empower people. So when people were meeting once a week, we started creating these committees. We also benefited a great deal from people in our midst that were from Spain that had experienced, that process and had a lot of input, and also people from Greece that had been active organizers and participants in that. So the discussion was really good, and it was heated. And one of the things that very quickly we had to put off, and it sometimes jeopardized how far we can get in our meetings that would last anywhere from 5 to 6 to 7 hours, is this idea of demands, which until now we still hear about it. What do you stand for? And we came up with a short statement of like, the General Assembly is a place for people to constitute themselves as political beings. It's about creating an environment where there could be a discourse that gets elevated at another level, and that it becomes inclusive of a lot of different people. So rather than have the demands up front, the demands, whatever is needed comes out organically from this conversation. And that ultimately it's a space to empower people. So, there are a lot of reasons why everyone came out. I came out because I'm inspired, and I came out because I'm trained as a lawyer, and I used to make a lot of money even though I come from a poor family, and I get my bonus, and it would, from borrowing food from people or borrowing a car from people and not having food to eat, even when I was in law school, then to get $50,000, $70,000 as a bonus, I just felt there was something wrong. And that was my moral obligation, and I didn't need a revolution to do that. I left my job 2.5 years ago. But there was something about this moment that I felt like we could do something together. And so we worked, all of us, and I think that's kind of why I came out. Other people came out because they're students and they don't have loans. I think you all know why people came out. It's just, part of the idea. One of the reasons why the 99% make sense to us then, and you can see the email chain, is because we didn't want to have demands. We didn't want to predetermine the outcome. We wanted to invite people into something that's beyond a protest. It has the potential to be a transformative movement. That has the potential to be a popular uprising. It has the potential to really shake the foundations of what's there. So a lot of people think in terms of political movements. This is not a political movement. We can talk later about how we fit into what's happening, right? But for now, I can tell you, this movement empowers already existing social struggles that have very clear and articulated demands. And we don't have to compromise this movement or limit it in scope, or address the issue of demands as if that's a sense of empowerment. Demands from who? I mean, you can get into that whole conversation. But I'm not, how am I? Okay. So now, fast forward to the space that people are referring to as Liberty Square. That was our backup plan. We were taking, we were taking the Chase Plaza, and they knew about that, and we had small leaflets with a short map of that, a small map of that area with 10 different spots. And when they closed down that place, we tweeted and word of mouth to the second place, which was godsend in a way. And the critical moment there, and that everyone needs to understand, is that we had committees that were nascent. The organizational structure was also a General Assembly. We knew how to, Marina was one of the first people to facilitate that night. And there was a group of maybe 8 or 9 people that did that.
You facilitated.
Right. But what was key there is that it was a General Assembly that included over 1,000 people. And the sole issue on the agenda was whether to occupy the space that we were inhabiting while the police were around us. And that discourse went way beyond the threats in periods when we had to do that. And we decided, yeah. But we had addressed a few things beforehand, whether this is violent or non-violent, whether we respect diversity of tactics, certain things. So even in that initial discussion, it was creating a sense of community. So now fast forward to today, you have over 22 working groups. You have one of them is town planning that just reorganized the space. That there's another group that needs to become more active, 2 groups. Safe spaces is another one of them. But so we have working groups that have very logistical things to take care of, like facilitation. The important thing about the process that we're doing and the organizing that we're doing is that it has to remain horizontal, non-hierarchical, inclusive, where you empower people with a process. That process is important so people can speak and be heard, and where you can focus more on people listening rather than speaking. And you can address a lot of issues in our society that though we're not sensitized enough to, like, we oppress each other. That our actions, though may not be intentional, somewhat are marginalize other people's voices. We do this because some people are more comfortable in speaking. All these things we're dealing with over there, and you have working groups that, food, comfort, all these things that we have, and that's how we organize. We meet once, we have General Assembly every evening. Every morning we have check-in for the working groups. These check-ins are for coordination purposes. The General Assembly is the body by which decisions are made. It's made by modified consensus. We try as hard as possible to reach consensus. Rarely do we go to a vote. If we go to a vote, it's 9/10. And we need complementary structures that we're working on right now because we grew too fast, and we need more of dealing with issues of accountability and transparency, because General Assembly is open to anyone. And so you can show up and participate in a very important decision relating to finances, even though you may not know much about what's going on. So we want to make sure that that body addresses the things that are most important in the political realm.
So now we're going to go from New York to flash backwards to Spain. I'm sorry, we were supposed to have, you had photos and a whole PowerPoint.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Oh, so
that's okay. Thanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the causes and the context in Spain, some of the characteristics of the movement, and a little bit about the impact. But really, it's going to be more like a set of bullet points than a complete analysis. And part of it is that we have to keep in mind that this is a very new movement that is still happening and changing, and that it proposes some very novel kind of things that haven't been done before. And so it's very hard to think the present. We don't have the perspective, and so it's it's going to be a kind of disorganized point, but I hope that they will lead us to an enriching discussion. So there are precedents for this movement, both national and international. Among the national were some protests that took place some years before for different things, but that kind of gave the people a sense that they could get together and do something. So one was a protest against the war in Iraq. Another was a movement against the government lies in the wake of the 11M attacks. So in 24 hours, you had millions of people out on the street, and that really empowered people. Also, protests against the Bologna Plan, which is a plan aimed to standardize the whole education in Europe and was viewed as a plan that was going to privatize education. And in the international realm, of course, there was the protests in Greece. Also, the protests in Iceland were very important. It was talked about a lot in the mass media. These protests were against the bailing out of the banks, and they were demanding a more direct democracy. And of course, the Arab Spring. As to some of the causes, of course, there's the economic crisis that affects all spheres of life. And just to give you a sense, 45% of young people are unemployed. These are numbers from summer of this year. 54% of people ages 18 to 34 live with their parents because housing is so expensive. And the minimum wage is 600 euros, which is pretty low given the cost of life in Europe. Another cause was corruption. There have been numerous scandals lately of corrupt politicians. And something that I think has an analogy with the United States maybe is that people feel sort of disillusioned with the government. They have promised to put some policies out that they haven't gone through. And there's a sense that there's not really much of a choice when you get to vote. You hear a lot that both parties that are the biggest and most important, the PP and PSOE, I guess that's a literal, are the same thing. They should be, one is supposed to be more right-wing and the other one is supposed to be more left-wing, but in practice, people perceive them to be more or less the same. And this is a concern for everyone. There's also, of course, the outrage at the impunity enjoyed by the responsible for the economic crisis. A lot of the banks and financial institutions continue to make the same amount of money or even more money than they did in the crisis, while everyone else gets impoverished. Especially the middle class. There's been an impoverishment of the middle class where the middle class is getting smaller and poorer. There was also an introduction of a labor legislation that made layoffs a lot more cheap, even almost to the point of making them for free. And this really got people angry. There are also ecological concerns, but I think the most important concern is a concern for the future. For the first time in many decades, it is certain that newer generations will not live a better life than those who preceded them. And this is something that's changed. We have the impression that the world is getting better and better, and suddenly something has changed. This is not going to be true for the next generation. And a very important factor to take into account is the regional and municipal elections that were to take place and that took place in May 22. So the movement began taking the square 1 week before the elections. And this really helped to get people united like very, very fast. There was a sense of urgency. It wasn't like there was an event coming and people wanted to influence that event. So I'll talk a little bit about the characteristics, although I'm sure you're familiar with most of them. This movement has mobilized sectors of the population that had never protested before in their lives. So you have people 18, 19 years old who are really going for the first time in their lives to a protest. And something that was very popular to hear like 5 years ago in Spain was that the new generation was a generation with a lot of apathy, that they didn't fight for what they had. They didn't know what they had because they hadn't had to fight for it, and they just took things for granted. And so this has been very interesting because a lot of people are going against that complaint, saying, no, the young people do care, we do know what we want, and we're going to fight for what has taken so many generations to construct, and we're not going to let it go. And actually, you hear, I've heard about 3 times in the assemblies, people saying something like, we have to do what our grandparents did, and we have to take the square just like they did, and even coming up with stories and photos of their grandparents. In the time of Franco, there was this kind of underground political getting together and moving and protesting. And after the Spanish transition, it sort of went, it sort of almost disappeared. So this is something that's coming back, and it's very exciting. Also, it's a pluralistic movement. It's nonpartisan. It is very big. I mean, it's the most intense mobilization since the end of the Spanish transition. So for example, this last 15 October, there were about 500,000 people in Madrid who were protesting and about 300,000 in Barcelona. And there's a lack of leaders. So of course this has risks, but also benefits. It is less likely to be manipulated or co-opted. There are no uses of charisma or these kinds of things that have been problematic in the past. And something that I wish to emphasize on is its nonviolent character. So I think there are 2 kinds of nonviolence, and one is strategic, and the other one is convictional. And I really think this is a convictional kind of nonviolence. Nonviolence comes in many degrees and many kinds of presentations. It's not only physical violence. So I think the protest is against a violent system. Inequality is a kind of violence. And so committing to nonviolence is kind of bringing ethics into politics, which is very related to what the protest is about. It's also a compromise, a kind of promise between people of having also an active attitude. So nonviolence doesn't mean some kind of apathy or passiveness. On the contrary, it's a very active attitude. And it's very related to democracy as well. The more we can reduce violence, the more democratic we can be. Gandhi said that true democracy can only be an outcome of non-violence. A lot of protesters, one of the phrases one hears is that these are our arms, and they put their palms open. So it's also a very inclusive movement, so that it goes hand in hand with nonviolence. It goes against a sexist language. So in Spanish, words that end with O are masculine and words that end with A are feminine, and they use an at symbol to not kind of get into that sexist language. They also use sign language, so in most assemblies they have a translator. And they have open assemblies, working groups. There has been a very high presence of women, but Vicente will talk more about the organizing and the assemblies. And also very important is the scale of local and global. So on the one hand, you have assemblies even in very, very small towns. I went to an assembly in a town of 100 people. And you got more regional assemblies and the big ones in Madrid and Barcelona especially. But it's also global in the sense that it has communication with other movements, it has similarities. There are, I think, and this is a reaction towards global problems. So this is a quote from an analyst in Spain, and he says, "If economies, trade, communications, and security operate globally, why shouldn't the expression of indignation against injustice be global as well? The demand for change can also be global." So I think we have to be careful in talking about the differences and similarities of different movements. I think there are very important differences between, for example, Egypt and Spain, Spain and the United States. But it's also very enriching to look at the similarities, and this is something we'll talk about. And then just to end a little bit about the impact. What has this, how has this has consequences? A lot of people say that because it didn't collapse the system or something, it didn't have consequences, but I think it has a lot of consequences and a lot of important impacts. So one is, it's a new way of making politics. It's a street politics. Parties have lost the exclusive privilege of political action. It's a new attitude. It brings people hope. It's a way of citizens educating themselves and not needing an authority to bring them culture or to bring them ideas. It's a movement with proposals, so it's not just complaining. and waiting for an answer. It's doing things, it's organizing people. It's constructing a mini society, really. When you go to an assembly, you have a place for information, a library, and you have the sense of being in a small city. It's a new way of participating in a common life and a sense of community. It's also a change in the political content and priorities of mass media. So in Spain, they were complaining that when things got rough in the political arena, there was always distracting news and debates about dumb laws that nobody cared about. And this makes mass media talk about what people are interested in, what people are concerned with. And it's also planting seeds for new movements and proposals at national and international level, like the Green Tide, which was a recent protest by the teachers, and the movement of October 15, which was global. Finally, there has also been an electoral impact. So different polls say different numbers, but about 20% of people took into account the movement to vote. And the hope is that this will have an impact for the presidential elections. So, thank you.
Hi, good evening. Well, I'm going to follow what Carissa presented, but I'm going to focus a little bit more on the organization and structural aspects of the movement, and also I will continue also with some characterizations of the movement, although as she already said, it's really difficult because it's alive, it's dynamic, and it changes throughout time. So that's what I'm going to try to characterize a little bit. Maybe to begin at some point, also related to the precedents of the movement and the factors that Carissa mentioned, let me just mention some of the constituencies of the May 15th movement. There are a lot of organizations, platforms involved, but maybe 4 of them can be highlighted to some point. Well, one is of course Democracia Real, which is the platform that called to the May 15th demonstration first, and then there are also Juventud Sin Futuro, which is a platform of students concerned with problems with the education system and also the problems of youth unemployment. Another one is V de Vivienda, which works with the housing problem. And another one, also more focused in internet, through internet, it's No Les Votes, which is concerned with the reform of the political system. I mentioned these 4 platforms because I think, they share some characteristics. First, they have a non-essentialist character. Let me explain it. They focus on struggles defined by its transitional character and its interpellation to the subjects as individuals. So they interpolate the people in its very individual level, like in their everyday life and their everyday experience of these different problems. And so, therefore, these subjects are not interpolated as part of a stable identity or class or ideology or a defined political program, but more as a community of people that is sharing at a precise point in time. These people are sharing the same situation or concern. I will later maybe explain this a little bit better. Also, this movement, in some of the documents it has produced, it defines, or it stressed some interesting characteristics, like the insistence in the collective intelligence. Also, it defines itself as a movement that is laying the foundations for a new form of social organization for the 21st century. Also, as an heterogeneous movement composed of people of all ages and ideologies. Well, I will go deeper into these points at the end of my intervention. But first, let me explain a little bit about the structure or the organization of the movement. I'm using here a document produced by the Madrid Assembly, the Sol Assembly. Okay, it's a movement. It's called "How to Cook a Peaceful Revolution," and it's a very informative document to to see a little bit how the functioning of the Madrid Assembly. Of course, other assemblies may have slight differences, other structures, depending according to the specific constituencies, the specific concerns of each part of the country. But basically it has like 3 levels. One is the level of the assemblies, the second one is the committees, and the third one is the working groups. The assemblies meet once a week or every 2 weeks. They mostly serve as organs for information and coordination, not so much for decision making. This type of structure is the one that later is being replicated in every neighborhood. So every city neighborhood has its own general assembly, which later transmits its decisions to the Seoul General Assembly. That meaning at the local level, at the city like Madrid. On a national scale, there has been meetings between representatives of each city assembly. Also, it's important to note that each of the constituents of the movement, these previous platforms I mentioned, like Democracia Real Ya or Juventud Sin Futuro, also held national meetings throughout the summer. So they are also organizing themselves in various ways. The second level, so to say, is the committees. The committees are in charge of providing all sorts of infrastructure, services, resources, information, health, etc., to all the citizens. To all the citizens in this like micro society or micro cities that are emerging in the squares. It is important to note that the campers at the squares are only one part of this population, which is mostly configured by everyone working there, passing by or joining a particular meeting or event. This speaks again of the open-ended character of the movement. There are multiple ways and degrees of participation. In this sense, the occupation aspect is maybe not so important as providing a potential space of encounter and collaboration between all citizens. And especially, as Carissa mentioned, especially those that were not previously engaged in political action. Which maybe some people call it in a very beautiful way the still part of the movement. So it's important in every movement that there is also some quiet part. Okay. Or still part. Yeah. Maybe also this is, and it's also a very defining characteristic of the movement, is that, I'm quoting now an anonymous girl, young girl in Madrid, who says, "Each one of us is unemployed now, and no one can find a job in his or her own field of work. But in the square we know how to do anything." By this variety of engagements, of collaborations, this movement put in motion the broad range of energies, skills, abilities, knowledge, etc., that are usually exploited, wasted, and squandered by capital. Is there a better form to question the myth of the efficiency of capitalism? Think about the range of services and objects that this square produce. Well, again, like all kinds of materials, of knowledge, of text, videos, etc. And it's like people are just using that their own professional skills, but now in a very in another sort of production, right? Also, another thing is, this diversity of backgrounds, of interests and goals, the question is how to manage all this diversity. And one innovation in this sense has been the Respect Commission, or Comisión de Respeto, I don't know if that's a good translation, based on principles of solidarity, but also principles of exigency from one to another, from one citizen to another. The third level are the working groups. In this sense, the working groups function as producers of the movement thinking and discourse. They focus on different issues, themes, problematics, and are coordinated through the working groups committee. Again, then, so there are a lot of working groups, like in economy, politics, health, education, etc. These working groups coordinate themselves in a working group committee, which then goes to the committee assembly, which is one of the big assemblies. And maybe one point here, interesting related to the working groups, and I think it's interesting also in the debate of the demand. It's that, well, the movement, the initial call by Democracia Real Ya, had these 8 initial proposals. I mean, before May 15. Actually, these initial 8 proposals, well, there are a variety of proposals, also subdivided in many sub-proposals, different points, but, well, basically, economic and political proposals. And it's also interesting to think about how they link the economic and the political in the 8 proposals. But I think one interesting point is that far from these proposals, far from being divisive, provided a framework which forces the formation of working groups. So that was the starting point for example, the economic proposals helped economists and different experts to join and begin to work together. Also, for example, another interesting point, well, the economic group particularly has been really productive in Madrid. There are like around 150, something like that, economists working together and producing lots of documents and meetings and different things. And also another interesting working group maybe is the politics working group, which has 2 sections. One is focused on short-term policies, and the other one is focused on long-term policies, and they are coordinated together. Okay, this is basically the structure. Then there are many other things we can maybe discuss later. But maybe, for example, following what I just said, like this distinction is between like short-term politics and long-term politics. I think now I will talk a little bit more about the characterization of the movement. And I think it's maybe one of the most striking or interesting characteristics of the movement is how it defies traditional oppositions concepts in opposition throughout political history. And it has a strong paradoxical character. Then, for example, and speaking about the proposals and this short-term, long-term, we could define the movement maybe as an alliance or a mixture, a very productive dialogue between some reformist position and some more radical positions. Actually, it's more than that, more than just a dialogue. Actually, I think we could even speak like, it's really amazing to see this combination of sometimes reformist discourse with radical tactics. And it's really amazing to see that. And actually, then the time goes by and then it's difficult to tell anymore who is the radical and who is the reformist. Which is that, actually, I think, really productive, really funny, really powerful politically. Then, well, again, I think we could even like deconstruct traditional oppositions, like the one between what is utopian or what is realistic, right? What is real politics, what is just utopia. Amador Fernández Sabater, which is one of the a really interesting figure and has been really close to the movement. He says that he prefers to speak about heterotopia, which I think it's like to establish a certain distance to the reality in order to transform it. But well, and yeah, again, but well, maybe this idea we can discuss later. But basically, this idea that there's this mixing of things that used to be in opposition, but I think it's really important.
Well, I will start from from Friday, February 11th, when Mubarak stepped down after sunset in Cairo. That glorious day when we're in Tahrir Square and we hear the microphones, we hear the voice of the vice president declaring that Mubarak is shifting the power and he's stepping down, leaving the Iran. A very glorious and magical moment, actually, that struck everybody in the square and everybody in the country. Nobody would believe that it's going to happen, especially after the second half of the revolution, when we started witnessing a kind of counter-revolution, a kind of reformists, a kind of shortcut version of finishing up demonstration in big cities and liquidating the momentum that we kept accumulating for almost 18 days. This moment when he stepped down, I remembered a quote I read a long time ago for Hannah Arendt when she was talking about the human condition. The human condition, according to her, as far as I remember, was a kind of creating something new, something unprecedented, something disclosing a human radical potential for that make a kind of rupture with the past and opening for new possibilities. This would be actually my feeling, and I would assume it was the feelings of millions of Egyptians and millions of Arab citizens and millions of people all over the world. Nobody in Egypt actually in December 2010 or early weeks of January 2011 would expect this one to happen. The country was more predicted and more assured, at least for my generation. The generation who was raised up during the 80s and 90s and first decade of 21st century on what I used to call the sewage and bridge nationalism. When the President Mubarak used to open, when the Egyptian TV used to claim that, okay, opening a new sewage station or a new bridge or subway is a kind of national pride, or winning a match in World Cup qualifications would be like kind of project or enterprise that should recruit and mobilize people for this. So before the years that preceded the revolution, actually witnessed very complicated feelings. On the one hand, the intellectual scene was affirming a dystopic future. You can see it in novels, you can see it in literature, and you can see it in cinema. Many, like there was a famous genre of movies talking about explosion and talking about apocalyptic scene. It was like masses coming from nowhere, coming from the slums, from born and occupying the headquarters and the major squares of the city, not to revolt or not to ouster the regime or to step down, to deconstruct the regime, but to omnipresent chaos. Okay, so this chaotic and this utopic future was very clear for anybody who would follow the Egyptian literature and cinema in the last 10 years. On the other hand, while the intelligentsia and while many middle class intellectuals, university students were thinking or affirming this, and were like even thinking in the Mediterranean while they are illegally trying to immigrate to Europe or trying to get a visa to Canada or United States to immigrate and settle there or leaving the country. At the same time, there was a very nascent and growing movement between workers, peasants, and the multitude of unemployed people in the country. The last 5 years actually witnessed hundreds or even thousands of worker strikes, but nobody would feel this. Nobody would put a question mark about the possibilities of turning these social struggles into a political one, about the idea and the mechanisms that can turn these social struggles that seek short-term demands into a political project or political manifesto or political program to change the country. So, before the revolution, as I mentioned, the scene was very contradicting. There was challenges escalating to the regime by the workers' movement, by the student movement, by the human rights movement after the police brutality, especially in 2010. And on the other hand, there was a kind of losing any faith of the future in this country. And this is what signified this moment on on the night of February 11th, when we believed there's something new coming, when we started to not only discover the world, not only discover these beloved squares all over Egypt, not only in Tahrir, not only to rediscover ourselves, to rethink about ourselves, to question the things that we were raised upon, and to think that the older generations, many of them actually was very conservative and were thinking on different ways, and were thinking that we should leave the square. But on the other hand, there was part like the revolution changed many of them. My uncle is 70 years old man, he has no children, and he went to Tahrir Square. I discovered by chance in July that he was camping in Tahrir for 18 days. And I wouldn't expect this. So this revolution actually changed many things. As I mentioned, it put a big question about discovering ourselves, discovering this human potentialities and this radical potentialities that we can do it. We still can believe in this country. We still can test our, we were like hotel residents. We were like, how can you form 84 or 83 millions from statistics in United Nations report to a nation or to a people to question this political thing. This was a very optimistic and very utopian moment when Mubarak stepped down. Me and many of the activists and many of the people who participated in the revolution, we knew very well this is not the end. It's not the end that the American media and Western media usually represent the revolution as 18th day, which is not true. This is the starting, this is the beginning of history. And we are having many challenges. And these challenges started to accumulate and started to manifest now in sectarianism, in populism, in the counter-revolution, systematic counter-revolution engineered by the capitalists, some capitalists who were attached to the Mubarak regime, and by the army, of course, by the Supreme Council of the Army. We understood there is many challenges, and this is not the end. And we understood as well there are many illusions are perpetuated about this revolution, like if it's like a youth revolution or a non-violent revolution, or it's just only Tahrir. And this is actually very important to affirm here that well, the youth played a very important role in this, in the revolution, the ongoing revolution, I would say. But it also encompassed many sectors of the Egyptian people, many generations, and many people who actually would witness people who are rethinking their fundamental ways of thinking. Many people are very conservative in terms of social conservatism, or people are very like ultra-religious or ultra-orthodox religious. People are thinking their mentality and their mindsets. Even people who used to have a radical blueprint about what is revolution. Many Marxists, many leftists, many liberals changed their mindset. This is a very important thing. So the revolution was not only a kind of youth revolution, it was not non-violent revolution. Of course, there was very important non-violent element and factor in this revolution, and but this was reflecting consciousness that we are the people who are deciding the game. After the day of, after the first Friday, after 3 major battles in Alexandria and Cairo and the glorious city of Suez, which actually every Egyptian in Tahrir Square and any other squares owes a lot, a major contribution for the success of this revolution to the city of Suez. So in January 28th, we understood this is, we have to decide. We have to decide the game. Okay, the regime wants to drag us to a violent movement, wants to drag us to the standards and the parameters and the idea he wanted to play the game with, but we imposed this non-violence. And this non-violence actually was based and predicated on a huge battles in Cairo and Suez and Mahal al-Kubra, industrial city in Delta, and in Alexandria. So the rosy image about Tahrir Square, I would say that the revolution should not only dwarf it and minimize in this rosy image about millions of people flocking and flooding to Tahrir Square. This is very true, but there are other things. There was violent and I would say radical violent, revolutionary violent resistance against the police and against the state apparatus, against national security in all these cities. This is not like a kind of violent propaganda, but to think and rethink critically about the notion of non-violence, which is presented as a category or exclusionary category for any other kind of resistance and social action. In Wall Street, in Cairo, in Tahrir Square, in anti-colonial resistance. So the notion of violence has to be rethought, re-questioned, and redefined. The other thing I wanted to talk about is how this revolution was a kind of articulation between a very spontaneous popular movement that gathered many forms of organization and many forms of individual and collective initiatives in poor neighborhoods, in slums, in middle class quarters. Hand in hand with very organized movement accumulated and utilized its social capital and its experience of strikes and sit-in and negotiations among the workers' movement. So I would claim also that Mubarak couldn't step down on February 11th unless the potential general strike that the working class alarmed, basically in the textile workers and the workers of Suez Canal. And this happened 2 days exactly before the step down. And this, as many experts and many eyewitnesses affirmed, this was the knockout. This was the thing that made the army turn the other way around and force Mubarak to step down. So the revolution was not only just a spontaneous or multitude of people, of masses. This was very important in deconstructing the Mubarak regime, or at least to force him to step down. But this wouldn't happen before this general strike. And the Egyptian revolution actually wouldn't succeed under this, the recent challenges and threats and systematic counter-revolution without the success of general strike. This is very important, and this is what we are fighting for in Egypt now. And actually the avant-garde of this revolution now are the workers and the poor people who are fighting and challenging the bourgeoisie and challenging the media and the army and the government, which is criminalizing, according to the law, criminalizing any kind of strikes. They are imposing their demands, and they are trying to push this revolution forward and make it works and success. I have many things to say, but the most important thing, and the thing that I would conclude with, two things actually. So
We'll organize another whole presentation, I think, just on each place.
Yes, there's no blueprint for struggle. Okay, I am here with my brothers and sisters, with comrades. I'm learning a lot, and I'm trying to share experience. I'm trying to tell Amin and tell Marina what's my reflections, what I thought, what I learned from Tahrir, and I'm trying to tell my fellows in Cairo and in Egypt what I learned from here. So first, there's no blueprint, okay, for the revolution. The Egyptian revolution didn't finish; it's still in working and still in struggle, okay. And this moment, as I mentioned, as I felt in February 11th, this moment is creating something new. What's going on now in Greece, in Tunisia, and Egypt, the Arab Spring, and here in Wall Street, actually is something unprecedented and has a potential unprecedented consequences, which I would assume completely different from many historical juncture in the last 2 centuries. It's different from the youth generation of 1968. It's different from People Spring in 1848, and it's different, of course, of the Eastern European revolts in 1989. So thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk. And I'm ready for any questions. Thank you.
So before we open it up to general questions, if folks on the panel have questions for each other's movements, or just general, it can be practical, it can be theoretical. I know you have 4 pages of notes. New York is the young, we're the babies here, so.
I mean, I think just from, since there's going to be multiple sessions like this, I'm just thinking in terms, 2 topics stand out. One is the topic of nonviolence, and then the other one is the topic of demands. And I think it's interesting, I would say, I mean, it was very illuminating how Spain seems to have dealt with it, where it wasn't demands, it was proposals, so kind of set the agenda for the political discourse that was going to happen, something New York didn't do. But I would start with nonviolence, because I think it was an important decision we had to make over here, especially because New York has a lot of different constituents, at least in the movement in Wall Street. You have anarchists, you have anti-capitalists, you have reformists, you have the people that are not political out there. And one thing that we had to figure out is how everyone can be on the same page. So I'm interested, here's the question, I'm interested in how that decision was made, or whether it happened organically. I think Egypt's a little different, so I would ask a different question about Egypt, because I know the revolution was in fact violent. But maybe from Spain.
Well, I would say that, yeah, it was probably organical. I think, of course, the situation in Spain was not so tense. I mean, of course, not as in Egypt, and I think also the relation with the police was also not as tense as here. I would say also that maybe linking this question with one characteristic that we both, I think, mentioned concerning Spain is like this rejection of previous identities, or that like not sharing together at the square. And I think this relates to also to the relation with the police, actually. I think also the author I mentioned, Fernando Sabater, put it in very beautiful terms. I think he says that when you are at a demonstration and you shout insult to some policeman, you are just like reaffirming the previous identities and roles that were already existing. So it's like it's just confirm again what we already knew. It's just like, okay, the police is there, and we are here, and we are enemies, so on. But then, as Garcia mentioned, that there are like tactical non-violence and conventional non-violence. But in this way, I think non-violent violence in Spain accomplished two goals, like conventional and also tactical, because the result was also that the main union within the police issued two statements saying that, well, they support the movement, although, well, okay, please guys, be careful in the street, don't be too bad and so on, but you have to keep the order and everything, but we understand your cause and we support it, we sympathize with your cause. And I think that's, yeah, a really interesting point, to establish this relationship with the police. There were also episodes of violence, of course, but it was started, of course, by the police, mainly in Barcelona, in Plaza Catalunya. The eviction from the square in June was particularly hard and violent.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the relationship with the police has been very interesting. Yes, there has been violence from the police, especially in Barcelona, but it did create a scandal and people were very angry at it. And in Madrid, if you think about the quantities of people that there are in the square, there's really been very, very few incidents. I mean, compared to New York, where 6,000 people protested and 700 got arrested, I think in Spain, at the most, about 150 have gotten arrested in all these months. And there have been 1 million people on the streets. So I think that's very interesting. And also, I think the question of violence never even came up. I think one of the things I love about the Spanish movement is that, as Vicente said, it's not antagonistic. So I think that's very important a very important difference with Egypt. I mean, at a certain point it was clear that one of the objectives, or the main objective, I mean, not now, but before in Egypt, was to overthrow Mubarak, right? But that's not the case in the US, and that's not the case in Spain. So the way I see Spain is an attempt to open channels of dialogue, and also to talk more, to solve some of the democratic deficits in the system, and that can't be brought about by violence. It just can't, and it won't. And also, so think about, suppose we decided to be violent, that would be, like Vicente said, just entering in the same old game where you have to fight and the stronger wins, and then it establishes a violent system once again. So I think it's very important. And related to this, I wanted to ask Hamid a question about Egypt. So a couple of days ago, there was an article in Newsweek about women in the world, and it enumerated different countries and different situations. And it listed about 160 countries, and I think Egypt was number 125 or something, if I remember correctly, more or less. So I wanted to ask you, what was the role of women in this protest? And you also talked about change, about discovering, about youth, about rethinking fundamental ways of thinking, both in religion and in political, like conservatives or liberals or whatever, and about deciding the game, about doing something new and writing new rules. So how does the role of women figure into this? And I think this is very much related to nonviolence and violence, right? And just if you could clarify what you mean by redefine what's violence. I was very interested in that, and I wasn't clear about what you meant, so I would love for you to comment on that.
Okay. So you want me to start with violence or with women? So, well, first of all, regarding the women issue, well, in the years before the revolution, actually women contributed highly to the social movement. For example, in 2008, there was a general strike in Mahal al-Kubra, it's an industrial city, and the major factory there, they have like 30,000 workers. So the men started striking and they were beaten by the police and they couldn't make a consensus. And suddenly they found a march from female workers, and in very brave move and tactic, they declared that we are starting the strike. Most of them are not members in feminist groups or human rights or leftist parties or whatever, but them are like peasants who are working in the factory or like workers. They decided, they took an initiative, and they started the strike. In the last 30 years, or last 25 years, Egypt has never witnessed a strike, a successful strike like the one started, initiated by female workers of Mahal. This is a very important example to give about how women would participate. During the early days, very violent days of the revolution, especially in January 25th and January 28th, like it was striking, you would see it on Al Jazeera or any media channel. Many women and many young girls were leading the chants and slogans against the regime. Very radical chants, actually, in the very early protest was raised by a woman, by a young girl. Nobody had a record about her, like she's just a girl. She heard these slogans, and like people were chanting against the police. And as the eyewitness told me, like she was one of the earliest people who said like الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام. We want to overthrow the regime. Okay, so she brought the radical thing. I'm not essentializing the category of women, of radical women, but like it's as far as I'm concerned, it's like a history. It's facts. Something happened already. So and the other thing also that Cairo was famous of sexual harassment, of like there's no access for women in the public space. But during the 18th day, women was flooding. Beautiful girls were flooding to Tahrir Square. Yeah, and like they didn't fear this. They were very courageous and they participated. And people were very gently and cooperatively in kind of solidarity with each other. And this is what I'm saying. How this is creating something new. Of course, after that, many things didn't go in the right direction. And there was on March 9th, the Women's Day, there was a female activist and women who tried to make a protest in Tahrir Square. They were crushed and suppressed by many people. We still have to put this into consideration. And I'm not thinking of the revolution as something ideal or idealistic or something like giving a magical solution. But the woman question is very taking a critical juncture actually after the revolution, because it's the first time it's articulated in a revolutionary and change political discourse. And the idea of women's rights is not clarified or presented as a separated issue or separated category by feminist movement. They are legitimate, their demands are legitimate, but I would say that the way they are presenting their demands, the women movement and women rights movement, the way they presented, they are presenting their demands, got a huge momentum after the revolution, like many other movement. Is this enough about them? Yeah, there's still some issues on the agenda, like should the new parliament give a quota or a certain percentage for women? Still debate, and this is very important. I think the most important right, in my point of view, is occupying the public space. Women who are going to the public space, in squares. Yeah, they have the right to participate in politics and public life. Okay, this is very important. Okay, and there are many discourses, you can count, many discourses are trying to disclose this, trying to affirm that women has to sit, women has like the same maternal positions and functions. 2 days ago, there was a Salafi movement or Salafi party. They had like the first women conference in Egypt. So the stage there was no woman in the stage. There was 3 Muslim sheikhs, and there was like thousands of women in front of them. But I would say this is going to change. Perhaps for somebody like Saba Mahmoud or people who were affirming before the idea of women agency, I think this is another challenge. So it's not enough to say that those people having agency. The revolution is a chance to rethink this agency and to develop this, because it's not enough from my point of view. So I would say that the most important thing for women now is to to participate actively and to snatch the rights in the public sphere. Violence, well, the idea is about the discourse of violence. I'm not asking you to, I'm not presenting an idea or advice, a satanic advice to people on Wall Street. Let's use violence. But there is other things we have to put in mind, because first, it seems that those people, like most of the people who are participating in Wall Street and in the plaza, well, it's very good that they are affirming the non-violent factor, but I'm afraid that we might condemn in the future if kind of violence happens in worker strikes, in slums, black neighborhoods, Latino neighborhoods. Okay, so our ideas about peace, about violence, about police function is a little bit relative, and we have to be a little bit humble about this. Okay, and I'm not a pacifist. I'm not idealist to think that this is going to move smoothly here or any other in any other place. But the idea that in certain moments we have to put a clear distinction between what is repressive violence and what is resistance and what is revolutionary violence. And we have to put in our minds that violence is not agenda, is not an agenda, but we have to protect ourselves. We have to struggle, and we have to understand. We have at least. Well, the situation here is quite different, but at least not to be very pacifist or not to be very like reclaiming this approach. The thing about non-violent peace and police are our friends. Yeah, police is a police. There's no good cab and bad cab. Police is the police. Here in Mars, 20 like centuries later, police is the police. And hopefully, centuries there will no be, inshallah, there will be no police. But actually, I mean, this is my idea about violence. Okay. I'm talking too much.
Just
Okay,
asking.
one question.
How about I would like to contribute to this discussion on violence and non-violence. Because I hear what Spain is saying, but I think I'm more in the camp of Muhammad, and I'll try to give a sense of why. I mean, one of the things that we've experienced in New York is, well, one of the things that white, middle-class, privileged people are experiencing in New York is police brutality. And they're shocked. The police has been quite violent in dealing with these protests. And it's been intentional, and it's something we anticipated. That's why we had to make a very strong decision. But in order to hold camp, we had to also agree that we would conduct ourselves in a non-violent manner, but we respect the diversity of tactics. To allow for other people to not constrain, because it is a horizontal mechanism where there is no, we can agree, we can achieve community, we can reach consensus, we can discuss, we build our own culture, but we also recognize within that body of nonviolence that there's diversity of tactics. Now, to go back, one of the things that, today I was in a meeting because I don't know if people have noticed, the people that are in Wall Street don't represent our community yet, in terms of color, in terms of voices. There are a lot of marginalized voices that aren't there, that want to be there, and this is something that we're constantly working on. And one of the reasons they're not there is because maybe they don't feel the space is for them, maybe they're a little hesitant, maybe, we have bourgeois senses of what we're talking about. All of a sudden the middle class is getting involved, if homeless people were there in the very beginning, they would have been thrown out. Period. It didn't matter whether there was a curfew or not. Now these are things that we're building in the sense of community and also acknowledging what's happening. So that's not to say that you would conduct yourself there's a history of nonviolence in the States, and we're drawing on it. But I think that it's important to recognize that people, I was on the bridge, and what they did over there was ridiculous. And one of the things that we had to work really hard on is people not to be afraid and not to react violently, because it wouldn't have helped them and it wouldn't have helped the cause. And I think that recognizing, I was going back, and I'll keep this very concrete. Today we're in a meeting with, a group of, people of color, and they were talking about what's really important to them. And one of the things that are very important to them is police brutality. And we were saying, we're with you on that. And they're like, yeah, but you just started realizing it. And I've seen people's faces change, because in Washington Square on the 15th, the police came with horses, and they were wearing their gear. You'd think you were in Egypt, during Mubarak's time. And there's a sense that people are not understanding what they're seeing yet. Now, all that's to say that things are a little bit more complicated, and from place to place it's different. And I think New York police is very, very, very hard on us. And when you look at Wall Street and where we're at, they have not given us an inch. We have to take it.
I want to add something. Actually, this is very important, because I want also to add something. Violence doesn't necessarily mean like I have a stone, I'm throwing them with the stone, or using violence in this conventional term. But here the law prevents us from uploading collectively in the plaza.
Yeah.
Prevents us from using tents.
Yeah.
The winter is coming, okay, and it's going to be very hard to come and sit in. They prevent us from using microphones. Here, many people think that the battle should be within the frames of law. Law here is oppressive. And there is an illusion about, I was shocked actually when the first time I went to the plaza and I figured out this. You can get a microphone. So we have to believe of the legitimacy of and the genuity of our rights. Okay, and law is a barrier. Sometimes, many times, the law is a barrier. Okay, and we should not stick to the fringe of the law. We have to change this law. It's not a divine thing. It's not something unquestioned. So this is other forms of rethinking the category of violence.
So I think something very important is not to confuse non-violence with passivity. Again, non-violence is not an act being a doormat. It's just not. Okay, so civil disobedience is non-violence. So you can change the law and you can defy the law. But I'm convinced that if you recur to violence, then you're just playing the same game. And I think Vicente's point is so important. I mean, I agree with you about police brutality in New York. I've seen it too. I was on the bridge. But how are you going to change that? By being violent against them? Of course not. You're going to create more antagonistic attitudes. And I don't think this thing that the police is the police here in Mars. I don't think so. Police are people. They're people with families, with concerns. And one of the most emotional discourses I've heard in Spain was the police talking and saying how he was with the people and he wanted to support it. So I think precisely the objective should be to bring down those barriers. I mean, the moment when this is going to be really successful is when police reject arresting people because they think it's right. It's wrong to arrest people. I think that will be a huge success. That would be. And I've talked to police in Liberty Plaza, and you get all kinds of responses. And the way to change things is to show people, to educate people. So one policeman, for example, was saying how the people who were protesting were just like bums, they should get a job, and the way you change that is by showing people that it's not like that they're working very hard, that it's not easy to camp there, that they're cold, showing that this is a committed movement, that people are being generous, that people are willing to give their work, their effort, and their energy to change the world and to make this a better place. And I don't think you can get that through violence, so any kind of violence.
Okay, so now as facilitator, I am going to step in because it's 8 o'clock and it's great. Just as temperatures are rising and we're getting a debate amongst the movements. I mean, it's both a debate and I think there's also a lot of questions. I think they're different. Everybody's coming from a different place, which is what's so amazing in this conversation. But it also means words mean different things. The context is different. The role of police or whatever are often different in different places. So kind of keeping that in mind as we try to have this conversation from many different locations, and New York has all of its many locations. So, but now we're going to open it up to, I think we'll take a few questions at a time or comments, and then folks can respond, and then back again. So, yeah, and if people could say their names, and if you want to say anything related to who you are, or something like that.
My name is Bach. I go to Mary Manhattan College, Sociology and International Studies major. So my question is regarding also, like, all of them are very powerful for me. Like Wall Street's more relevant just because I've spent more time there, and it's there's a difference between, like, being part of a movement and then reading about it. So I mean, here's my thing. I attended the General Assembly once, and I mean, I think it's powerful, and I'm not going to belittle it. Absolutely, I've been there, and I'm in support. Here's my problem, like in the General Assembly, like one of the working groups, they decided they're going to have like a people of color working group, and that's my problem. Unlike other revolutions, unlike other movements, like these things, like, I mean, we have different issues, I get it, but then, like, for Egypt, for example, like, I mean, it wasn't like, okay, let's make a women's committee, who's going to lead the revolution, and let's make a men's committee. So I feel like it's almost, and I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I'm not sure if this kind of fragmentation is kind of one of the problems that we're facing, because, I understand that's the only way, like, large marginalized groups will participate, but I also feel like someone like me was kind of turned off, and I was almost like, okay, so now am I a person of color, or am I one of the occupants of the Wall Street Park, So I mean, so here's, just a thought or a comment or a question, I don't know.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a few, and I can see, like, everybody looks really alert and excited, and I think we're going to have a lot of hands, so I'm going to apologize in advance. If not everyone gets to speak, we're going to continue this dialogue, and if things don't get totally answered, we should just continue to talk to each other in the space. But, yeah.
Hi, my name is Linda Tijani, and I'm an activist
organizer, and I specifically work on police brutality and cop watch in New York City. So the conversation of violence in its many forms is most salient for me. So what I'm thinking of in regards to Occupy Wall Street and the other movements is where is the race, class, and gender analysis when looking at how do we hold people accountable for the collective vision or the collective political education. So while I appreciate and love Occupy Wall Street and do go there before work and after work and spend weekends there, what comes up for me is I'm in constant struggle with white men who are telling me that they consider themselves a person of color because everyone comes from Africa. And so this is, if I'm in struggle with them in that conversation, and I still get that they're there because they want to fight capitalism. For me, when you fight capitalism, you're fighting white supremacy and patriarchy. So where is that in the conversation of accountability for folks both in Occupy Wall Street who are supporting, but also looking at police officers and them as people and then them as representatives of persistent state violence?
Okay, so we're gonna have one, there's two more, one, and then two, and just as people know, some people are starting to do this when people are talking. This is what we use in the assemblies. It's in sign language, it's applause, so like you like it. So it's kind of going around the room so you don't think that there's some little club in here signaling each other. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Maria. Thank you for the presentation. I would like to point in a question that I'm from Barcelona. I was in occupations also in the square there this last month. And it was surprising how the media was covering all these mobilizations because there has been so many mobilizations during these past years and the media was never there. It was in all of them, and not in all of them, but most of them, and there was never the media. And it was surprising how in this case they were there. They are not there in the strikes, they are not there when there are huge demonstrations against the crisis, and that the situation was more or less the same. I mean, there was also the crisis, there was also this angry, and everything was similar, but in this case the media was there and the others not. And I think that one of the reasons for this is that this mobilization succeeded because it wasn't I mean that this mobilization this mobilization was like incorporated. Sorry for this mobilization was like incorporated in the system. That it wasn't stopping anything. It wasn't stopping the everyday production of capitalism in the city. We were like occupying only one square in Barcelona. We were in the middle of the city. The cars were running in the same. All the factories and all the system was running in the same way as every day. And I think the question is, what do we have to do to make these mobilizations really affect the system? I mean, because if we only stay in a square, and I think something similar happened in Madrid, if we are only staying there, maybe nothing happens and the system incorporates it and nothing is changing. And I think Egypt has nothing to do with this, and I think something different happened there. But for what I've seen here in New York City and Madrid and Barcelona, I think
one more.
Yeah, this kind of answers to that and, further challenges the discussion. I think the two things that are holding the movement back the most, and I do think it's a movement, but I can get into that, are, this friendly police discussion and consensus. I don't think the police in uniform will ever be a force for social good and can ever be on our side. Maybe if they take off their uniforms, and we say this at every single assembly that I've been a part of, come join us, take off your uniform. I've never met an ununiformed cop that have come up and supported, actually come to the movement. I think, that's their role is to uphold the laws of those in power. And if you want to look at, let me see with my thought, the idea, if you want to actually include folks of color, homeless folks, I used to be homeless myself, if you want to include them, don't tell them that the police are on our side, that it's inherently going to exclude those folks. If you're saying the police are with you, you just have to go up and talk to them and change their minds. That's not why they exist. And I mean, if they want to, disobey the orders, they can get arrested and lose their job and not feed their family. So that's pretty much the choice they have. I think the second thing is we have to move away from consensus, and I see this happening, the push to 90%. I think eventually we'll have 50% plus one. I'm a student, union member, a PhD student, union member, and activist for 10 years, and I've been involved in, that's my life, is being in meetings. I've never been in a more boring, long, and divisive meeting structure as consensus. I think it actually allows us to be coopted because it's holding us back from actually getting to demands and getting to reaching out to labor and other, forces in society. And you see this today with Obama when he makes his announcement about his jobs plan and says that, oh, this represents the 99%. That this, if we're not going to have demands, we allow ourselves to be co-opted and reason. I think that's, I think like if we actually want to get to a place where we have a democratic movement, we have to move away from this 100%, and the leaders in this. I've never seen people more dogmatically adhering to a process and saying that, this is what we have to get to. So I guess I really challenge on that, especially, you want to talk about democracy, not having a tyranny of one or a tyranny of a minority continuously blocking things, and actually be able to, put the ideas into action. I think that changes with our process.
Now, do people want to respond, or should we take one or two more questions and then respond? Is that, okay, more questions. So it's like, okay, we want the dialogue. So Susan had her hand up. Melanie, I know their names, so maybe that's not fair. So Melanie was here, and then Jane, I'm sorry. And there's hands in the back I couldn't see, so.
Hi, my name is Melanie. I'm a theater maker, and I have a company called The Foundry. And I think a lot about the difference between the movement in Egypt and the movement in Spain and in the US, and that we are not set up to bring, that neither of these movements arose to take something down immediately. And I think a lot about the idea of invitation. As a theater maker, that's all I ever think about is invitation. And I wonder how, I get nervous about movements because I don't think enough people have been invited, or how do we continue to invite people? And so my question really comes to this. How do we keep inviting people? How do we do that and address the urgency of change, which, forget about what your opinion is, people are hungry. People gotta get fed. There are exigencies to be solved, there are emergencies to be solved. But this really feels like, what feels revolutionary about this movement to me is that it's not just to take capitalism down, it's to look at ourselves and change our culture and change things that are within ourselves that perpetuate that culture, even unconsciously sometimes. So how do we keep inviting and widening and widening and widening the invitation without people getting totally pissed off that we're not coming up with a platform, and the people who started 20 years ago, how do they stay engaged in the process of that invitation when you really want to make steps to do something? Sorry, did that question actually happen?
Yes.
Yeah. I can't stop grinning. This is such a wonderful discussion, and I'm a 60s person and have been interested in participatory decision-making processes for a long time. And I can tell you, if this were in the 60s, we'd all be yelling and screaming at each other. So I think something is going on that is really profoundly supporting this foundational feeling that we need to communicate. And we need to be able to have, I was really glad to hear you say the thing about consensus, because I have strong commitments to consensus. I wouldn't, and one of the questions that I'd like to raise and ask the people on the panel is to what, and I always want to ask this question, and I always end up asking it too specifically. I want to, what are the sources of the use of the consensus decision-making process? How do you, in Spain, for instance, is that developing? Are people learning how to be facilitators? Is there any kind of sense of a need for further training? It's that kind of a question, because for myself, I consider this process to be foundational. And I hear what you're saying, and I'm really glad to hear it. And I, would love to have, further that discussion. And the other thing, I just want to say quickly that as Marina talks about, she goes to Argentina, I go to my experience in the 60s and the civil rights movement in the 60s of the beloved community, and we want to participate in the decisions that affect our lives that came out of the Black Power movements and also the white movements. And I suspect that people from the Paris Commune are floating around somewhere as well, and even before that, I think. And I just want to put that out. Soyez réaliste, demandez l'impossible. That's from France, 1968, and it means be a realist, demand the impossible. So, thank you.
Okay, there's 1 and 2 and then
Thank you. Just very brief 2 questions. First is related to this level of organization. I think we all agree here that horizontalism can be very good in mobilizing people and bringing them together for particular events and manifestations. But my question is, to what extent is this helpful for addressing issues that have been already mentioned here, for example, structural violence or state violence? Because, I totally agree. We are in a sequence now that political representation for parties and election and so on is that. But at the same time, it still functions. Okay, nobody believes in it, but with the 37% of people of the vote, we can elect governments who can then transfer funds to banks and so on and so forth, and pay the police to keep people out. So I think, okay, the game is different, but how do we address, in terms of organization, this state power, state level that still functions? We all feel it when we talk about the police. And my second question would be, to what extent and how could we be able to make room for a category that I see somehow totally obliterated, and that is of class? Because I think there is a danger here within this movement. With all due respect, and I'm a total supporter of that, but even this idea of 99%, I think, has a bit of a populist twist, because we're not 99%. The split is there. We have migrant workers that people don't necessarily talk about, all this discussion about race and violence, police violence against black people in different neighborhoods. So I was wondering how to include this idea of class within this larger.
I'm struck, Mohammed, by you talking about kind of playing a role of mediator between your friends and colleagues and comrades in Egypt and here, and learning from both sides. So it's kind of clear to me and probably many of us what we in the United States had to learn from Egypt, but I would be curious to hear from you about what Egyptians might be learning or have to learn, or be, what an Egyptian who had participated in Tahrir Square would be interested in kind of following and seeing here from New York. And then in terms of this bigger question of horizontalism, I was just wondering from all of you, and you probably don't have time to answer it, but whether, there's a debate about whether the occupation should be violent, non-violent, diversity of tactics, whether consensus works or not. But what about in terms of a larger societal uprising, movement, response? Is there, for you committed horizontalists, I guess I'm wondering about your feelings about being in alliance with non-horizontal movements or possible, right? So it seems to me there could be all kinds of people, groups who are in alliance with the occupation, which could be a continually horizontal and committed and thoroughgoing horizontal space, but I don't see that as precluding the possibility of other groups having different tactics or coming up with demands or not using consensus. So.
I just have one line, a question. We've talked about a lot of ghosts, like 1870 or maybe 48, whatever, but I haven't heard people talk about 1919, the general strike, when Eugene V. Debs said, from the top of my head to the bottom of my feat, I am a Bolshevik and proud of it, and he was put to jail and got 1 million votes for president of the United States in 1920, or in, I think it was Michigan, war is hell caused by capitalism, was on the billboard, and the mayor who had put it up was reelected. I mean, I'm saying that the force, and that's a kind of violence, as I hear Mohammed talking about various recreating the notion of violence, the force of a strike, even the threat of a strike, is huge. But particularly the idea of what a general strike would look like globally today. Has that been discussed?
Anyway, but just on the process and the horizontal thing, and to distinguish, I guess is what I want to do, between consensus and forms of horizontal organizing, or horizontal relationships. So in Argentina, people came together and used the language of horizontalidad, and we've kind of adopted this language of being horizontal, but it really is just about coming together face to face. And all over the world, this is what people are choosing. I don't think, it's very rarely some kind of ideological, let's be horizontalists. This is a way to relate to one another in a way that's not people trying to have power over each other. So in the New York General Assembly, we use a form of consensus that is it's a conversation among people within the General Assembly as well. We kind of started with something small and it's really quite large. And a lot of places around the world absolutely do not use consensus, but that doesn't mean they're not horizontal. You can use forms of direct democracy and participatory democracy. I think all over the world what's so exciting is people are experimenting with ways of creating democracy together, a new democracy, real democracy, whatever it's called, to create these new social relationships and open space for that. So it can look like a lot of different things. And I think that's important to clarify, that often horizontal space and consensus with a whole lot of rules look like the same thing, and they're actually not. So that's my only point. And then who wants to talk to?
I can start off with a couple of things. I mean, and I'll start.
You have 9 points.
Well, I'm just keeping track of what people are saying, but
We're going to be committed to like 10
very brief.
more minutes total, 12 more
Yeah.
minutes total. Okay, just making sure we're all, and then we can hang out and talk. But.
Yeah. I think the idea, what I described earlier is that this is a transformative movement that's galvanizing already existing social struggles, their bases. And they have demands, and they have ways of decision making, and we're in solidarity with them, right? And they're welcome. I mean, labor has been a huge push. Students are slacking, but we're hearing good things. We're hearing good things. The idea of a strike is something that labor is considering. They were considering walkouts if they kicked us out of the plaza, right? So this is huge. Labor, I mean, sitting at a table in labor thinking about a strike, and we may see it in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So this is happening. In terms of, I want to go back, I'm just going to focus on the things that I think are most imminent for this movement. I think marginal, if I had a choice, I would steer away from 99%. That's just something that's catching. People like it. We came up with it so we can be able to reach out to people. But they love it. And there's something to it. I mean, there's an analysis behind it. It's not like it's flawed. But I think if there's one word that captures the imagination of what's going on in the square, and I think around the world, is voices. This is about each person's voice being heard. We amplify each other's voices. We amplify no matter what they're saying. There's strong opinions about nonviolence and what that means, and we're really kind of saying the same thing. But I think the ethos is about hearing and understanding, more about pushing the opinion they already formulated. Because one of the things that we're trying to do in the plaza, and I think around the world, is unleash this idea of imagination, staying away from isms and ideologies, trying together to come up with something new, break away from the paradigm, the existing paradigm, try to come up with something new. And so, very quickly, anything else? Yes, the idea of marginalized voices, and I emphasize voices. Marginalized voices need a space. The question is, how can we bring them into the fold in a way that they feel comfortable with? We've tried, anti-oppression workshops. We need more of those. A lot of teach-ins, we need more of those. But I think, and one of the things that we're learning is that though you empower people with a process, they use the process oppressively. and if you were to say respect the process, you should say respect the process and each other. And I think that, that's a product of trying to create a new reality when you're still stuck in the reality that you're in. And it doesn't happen overnight. But we need to be more patient with each other. If people of color choose to call themselves people of color, or they create a caucus like they've done now, we support them. Whatever helps them feel more empowered to have their voices heard and that space be theirs. Today I was with, Q-Tip and a tribe called West. And you know what they want to do? They don't want to do a concert. They want to be involved in a direct action. And we're going to create an affinity group that does that. There's different.
Briefly, first, well, I agree with you. Non-violence, civil obedience is not equal to pacifism, and I should rethink this. But I'm talking about policing as apparatus, as abstract thing, as a tool of the repressive tool, not in policemen. And I agree with you. I didn't mean at all to dehumanize policemen. Actually, most of the revolutions, the Bolshevik revolution, the Iranian revolution, the Egyptian revolution, managed to achieve their tasks by cracking down the apparatus of the police and the army. So this is another challenge we should take it into consideration to recruit those people who are resenting their status quo within the policemen. So hopefully we find a strike for policemen soon, and I'm very serious about this. It happened, and it will happen. Because it's not a monolith apparatus. There's many hierarchies and differentiations and inequalities within the police apparatus. And they are humans, okay? I didn't mean anything regarding the... well, there are many street tactics. I wouldn't say all of them, but one of them, which is actually very inspiring. During the 18 days strike, I didn't attend the 18 days, by the way. I arrived in Cairo in February. I wasn't studying. Nobody told me there's a revolution after a week. So I take it too easy, unfortunately. And I stayed 1 week in DC and went back to Cairo. So I arrived at February 3rd. A couple of days later, I told them, the Algerian liberation movement had a radio. If we had a radio, we could address all these hesitant people and tell them, okay, here is don't believe the rumors. Saying we are traitors, we are agents, we're taking money, all this stuff. Come and see how the Tahrir Square functioning, each square functioning and pushing forward this revolution. So I discovered here a couple of 2 weeks earlier, actually, something related to this. How can we use I'm not a fan of Steve Jobs, but one of his good stuff actually was the iPod radio transmitter. Yeah, we can use this. We have to use this. We have to make 2 radio stations. One in the Afro-American slang, addressing people in Harlem and Brooklyn, and one in Spanish, addressing the Latino people. So if you went to Latino people in Queens, they would be very afraid to go with you in a protest. Many of them are migrants, many of them might ship away from this country, but if you can address them, at least you will give them impression that you are very serious. We are very serious. And it's one of the things I learned from here. The other thing was very important. In Cairo, taxi drivers are the avant-garde of counter-revolution. They hate Tahrir Square, they love the police, and sympathize with the army. And it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. It's something, yeah, because actually I have to be frank, okay, the strikes and general strikes, it's influenced many interests of the people badly. But the taxi drivers in Cairo don't have a syndicate. Here I took a drive with a taxi. He was Egyptian, by the way, and he told me they are trying to form a syndicate, and he was very sympathizing. He was sympathizing with the Wall Street. So like alienation, the individual alienation of work, of labor, actually is much harder and more difficult than the collective one. So if I told my fellows in Cairo, if we manage to make a syndicate or union for taxi drivers, at least we would like have a fifth column within the counter revolution. I completely agree with you about the general strike, and this actually well, first of all, as I mentioned, I believe there's no blueprint for something. In some cases, I'm coming from different country. In some cases, some tactics are very useful. You have to face and encounter the state apparatus. Sometimes you have to face the regime. Sometimes you might need the avant-garde or revolutionary party. But I would say that general strike first shift any spontaneous and nascent and early movement to a very serious one, and would like alarm the white. I don't want to be racist by the end of this, but like to the rich people of Manhattan, of the United States, that we are bringing something, and should make them rethink many times what they believe in and what they stand for. The second thing about general strike, it gave a potentiality to change the mode of production, the idea of like the wages. Like I don't know any other useful and non-violent mechanism to change the mechanism of wage and to overcome the wide gap between wages and salaries. This is a very important thing in this country. Like the gap between the wealthy people and poor people, and the gap in salaries, very important. If we manage to make a general strike, this will address this idea, and like it brings the idea of social justice to a materialist basis. Yes, thank you.
Just very briefly, I mean, there are so many good points, and I'm sorry I can't address them, all of them, especially because I don't know what to say about them. They're really tough problems, right? But I love to hear them all, and I'm learning a lot from this dialogue. I think one of the most important challenges for the United States right now is what Melanie said, to how to invite people. It's very hard, and I just came here 2 months ago, so I really don't know the country. I don't understand the culture, so you have to talk to me about this. But my impression is that it's a much more polarized society than, for example, Spain. That's just an impression, and I'm not sure it's correct, or I have a hypothesis about it, but I'm not sure. And I think this has to do with what Jane asked about the process of the assemblies and communication. I think that has made it a little bit easier in Spain. I haven't seen so many polarized opinions, or, I mean, there are, but the contrast is really striking. And I think that has made communication easier and consent easier. I was reminded right now of Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, and the whole discourse about destruction. So one thing I really liked about a speech I heard in Spain was, if we fall again into a speech about destruction, about breaking down things, about these kinds of words, we're just, again, coming back to the same old story of the stronger one. And I think the dialogue should be about construction, about changing, about transforming. So about Maria's comment, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that this movement has not disrupted the system yet. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that it comes from within societies. Not necessarily. I mean, it can be, because it can dissolve. But I think it's also a great potential to actually transform what's going on and not break it, not confront it, not fight with it, transform it. And so I think that's an interesting idea. Yeah, just about the general strike, I don't know, I feel a little bit ambivalent. I guess I haven't thought about it enough. But one thing that comes to mind, I'm not sure about this, but just that if a general strike were to happen, it would be desirable to have at least a more clear petition, right? Because if you have a strike but you don't have a petition, then I'm not sure what that would result in. And then finally, just about, what you said about the police. Well, like Mohammed said, the police have been supportive in many revolutions, And as we said, in Spain, we have seen policemen without uniform and talking to people. And so I just really hope that you can see this in New York and that happens.
Okay. Yeah, again, so many questions, so many possible discussions. It's really impossible. But just a few points. Maybe related to the issue with violence and non-violence. There is also another dimension of it, and it's the relation with the media. And I think it's so. Again, it's not a matter of like being just like having goodwill to the policemen and not knowing, not acknowledging the role they are playing and what the police is as an institution, as a repressive apparatus and so on. But the thing is, it's just like what kind of a new game we establish. And also then related to the media, something that strikes me and shocks me a little bit here in the States is, for example, the huge attention that media has devoted to the movement only in the moment when there were all these arrests. And I think, I mean, in a short term, it's very beneficial, I think, to the movement. Like, it has like lots of space in the press. But at the same time, it really shocks me. For example, just to put one example, and I found really like ridiculous. It's the Lawrence O'Donnell show. So then there was like the square was already occupied for many, well, some days. And then one day, I think after the pepper spray episode, then he gave like a long speech of 10 minutes talking about the repression of the police and so on, and all these things like about the heroic protester against the policemen and so on. But at the end of these 10 minutes, I realized that he didn't mention at all why the protesters were on the street. And actually, I think this has also, it's related to the violence, and it's an aspect that maybe we can reflect on also a little bit. Is how violence then. I don't mean this like just in simple terms of what the media are going to think about us or something like that, or this perception. It's just that, well, how all the debate and the focus of attention is framed through the violence. And then also maybe then, because then there is always like this stress on, of course, on the freedom of expression, which of course I mean we all defend. But again, also sometimes I wonder. I talked with some students today, for example, and I asked them if they heard about Occupy Wall Street, if they visited the square and so on, and what they think about. And one of them told me, yeah, well, I don't know if I agree with them or not, but I like that they are defending their freedom of expression, which is nice. It's a nice statement, but at the same time, I always wonder, well, but besides the freedom of expression, is also what those voices are saying, and what's the message that we use freedom of expression to express. Then another thing, sorry, I'm just like this sort of divagation. I'm trying to cope with different questions. Also, there were two questions like how not to get integrated by the system. I think Carissa already answered this, and also then I think there was also another question related, maybe the question of the state power, right, or certain strategies to take power. Well, of course, it's a difficult question, but again, maybe, of course, we all know we have lived in like 30 years of complete hegemony, I think, of neoliberalism in the political, in the economy, in political terms, and also in ideological terms. So, I would prefer, for example, to see this movement as something that could take different forms throughout time in the future, but the opening of a space physically at the squares and also ideologically. So people can rethink again like ways of working together. And this could even like in the future have more impact in ways of organization of the working place and many other things. I think that there is a huge, there are so many ideas like going around the square, so many discussions, and I think that's really positive. And maybe just to make there's just one thing, and it's just returning to the proposals thing, but about also in relation to this question of the state, it's just that for example, the proposals in state could be termed as reformist, so to say. They are just proposing minor, so to say, well, significant changes, but minor from a radical perspective. But they have also this radical dimension in the sense of that one could see them as a way to actually to show how unable the state is to cope with this proposal. So even if you ask the state now, the political power, to take some kind of decisions that are not really like anti-capitalist or something like that, but just like some reforms, and then and actually you realize then that how political power is unable to answer to those reforms. I think that's a major first political step. I think in order to maybe then later raise further questions about the relation to the state and the political actions we could take up.
No, we agreed to be out of this space by 8:30. But what I want to say, I mean, so we're committing to that, so we said we do that. But for people to continue the discussion in the same way, there are now processes to occupy places in Brooklyn and Bronx and Harlem and all over. I would suggest not only will we be facilitating more dialogues, but that in that same spirit, for people to do it on their lunch break at work or with their friends or in neighborhoods. And I'm sure you can enlist, we have a lot of international folks here who've been a part of a lot of movements, which is really exciting. So you can, I'm sure, invite people to come to the discussion or just organize your own discussion, and we'll be happy to work.